Hey there, welcome back to another review. Um, this time of a film that I was genuinely really curious about because I like a good thriller, and I like a good thriller based on a true story, and Citizen X is one of those films. It's based on the investigation of the Russian serial killer Andrei Chikatilo. I don't know if I said his last name correctly or not, but I'm not Russian, so I don't really know how to pronounce some of these Russian names. And I remember seeing the trailer and I liked it, and I was like, okay, this is a pretty ballsy movie with the whole concept of this serial killer who killed 52 victims, and a lot of them were children over 8 years, over a span of 8 years. I mean, that's some pretty intense stuff. And then I see that it's got some good reviews, and then I see on the back of the DVD it says "Give Silence to the Lambs a run for its money," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, all right." But then after I get done watching it, I'm having a hard time remembering what the hell I just saw. So, eh, I, for me personally, I did not like this movie. I know this is a film that a lot of people like, think it's underrated, think it's so great that it should have been released in theaters. I definitely disagree with that. This is a film that definitely feels like it's made for the small screen, and this would not survive a theatrical release. It would not look good on a big screen because it's meant to be seen on the small screen because it's a TV movie. It's a made for TV, made for cable, HBO original film, and you can tell it doesn't have the budget. It has that flat feel that a lot of TV movies have. The only time it really has any sort of life to it is when the director decides to do some fancy artistic use of slow motion. But that's really about it, or some little bits of some few edits here and there. But it feels like it's a very lifeless movie. It's very hard to watch. It's very hard to sit through because it's so lifeless. I understand its subject material is really brutal and unflinching and is something that's hard to adapt and to any format, let alone television or the cinema. But it doesn't really give it an excuse to be as boring as it is. It goes on a span of 8 years, and it follows the pretty much what it does is it follows the investigation of the case. It follows with our main character, his story, Victor Burikov, played by Stephen Rea. And he's assigned to this case by the Russian government to try to find this killer, and it takes 8 years to finally find the guy. And he gets assigned to this special unit, and he with orders given to him, or he gets a lot of help from Donald Sutherland's character, who plays this character named Mikhail Fistov, and so they develop a relationship with one another. And then you have this. The film has this really, I think, kind of a bad tendency to focus too much on the melodrama and the politics of Russia at the time. So I'm like, do we really need to do this with this type of movie? I mean, I don't care about this bureaucratic bullshit. I don't give a shit. I don't keep your politics out of this serial killer thriller mystery movie. I don't care about the politics. But they shoehorn it in anyway. And then it's not until they finally get the help of a psychiatrist named Dr. Alexander Bukovnovsky, played by Max von Sydow, when they finally get enough evidence and enough, pretty much, they find a way to figure out who the killer might be, and they end up eventually catching Chikatilo. So the film was directed by Jeremio, I think it's Gerolmo, Chris Gerolmo, who hasn't really directed, I don't think, that much after this. Like he directed this, and then That was it, really. Well, I mean, he did this, and then he did like a TV series over there, and then he directed a TV movie in 2011 called Certain Prey. But that's it. He hasn't really directed anything since. And I can understand, I can see why. He's just not really you have this subject material, and he 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 directs a very forgettable film. It's amazing how forgettable this movie is for me, considering its subject material. 8 years, 52 victims, one serial killer. You would think this would be one of the most memorable true crime movies out there, but it just isn't. At least for me personally. I have a hard time remembering this movie now. And I know I saw it, a few months ago, but then I watched it again recently to refresh my memory, and I still have a hard time remembering the movie. So, since I have a hard time remembering it, I'm gonna go to the synopsis real quick on Wikipedia. What happens in this film is there's a body that's discovered on a collective farm during harvesting in 1982. A subsequent search of the adjacent woods, authorized by newly installed official Viktor Burakov, played by Stephen Rea, turns up 7 more bodies in varying stages of decomposition. The film Citizen X tells the story of the subsequent 8-year hunt by forensic specialist Burakov for the serial killer responsible for the mutilation and murder of over 50 people, 35 of them below the age of 18. Burakov is promoted to detective and eventually aided, covertly at first, by Colonel Mikhail Festov, played by Donald Sutherland, which I kind of thought was a little bit of miscasting. I like Donald Sutherland as an actor, but I have a hard time believing that he's Russian. And then his commanding officer and the shrewd head of the Provincial Committee for Crime, and much later by Dr. Alexander Bukonovsky, a psychiatrist played by Max von Sydow, who I thought did a great job. Max von Sydow was great, and I mean, he's just an excellent actor. And I actually didn't mind Stephen Rea either. I thought he actually did a pretty good job of what he had to work with. It's not his fault that the screenplay by Chris Gerolmo, who also directed the movie, was a really there wasn't really very many likable characters. And that was a serious problem the film had. Like there wasn't anybody to root for. There wasn't anything to really care about. And honestly, the most interesting character in the film was the killer, played by Jeffery DeMunn, who did a fantastic job. He stole the show. He was really, really good as Andre Chikatilo, but he barely had any screen time. It's a true crime movie about a serial killer, and the serial killer is barely even in the movie because it's decided to focus more on the investigation, which I think honestly was a little bit of a mistake, because you already know who the killer is before the detective does, so then it becomes a case of you're waiting for him to figure out what you already know, which is, I always think, is always a mistake in a movie like this. And once again, it felt like a mistake here because there was no suspense. So, as well as taking on the form of a crime thriller, the movie depicts Soviet propaganda and bureaucracy that contributed to the failure of law enforcement agencies to capture the killer, which I understand why they did that, but they could have handled it better because it really drags the film out and makes it really hard to sit through. Andrei Chikatilo for almost a decade. So they try to capture killer Andrei for almost a decade, but they can't because of some Soviet propaganda and bureaucratic bullshit. And Chikatilo's crimes are not reported publicly for years because local politicians were fearful that revelations would have a negative impact on the USSR's image, since serial killers are associated with Western moral corruption. Blah 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 blah. And Chikatilo first came under scrutiny early in the search when he was spotted at a station and found holding a satchel bag containing a knife. So yeah, he was already captured originally. Like he was promptly arrested after that, and it was Stephen Rea had a good idea. His character had a great idea to go into all these train stations and to start looking for people that he might fit the description or might be people that you could see kidnapping young kids. And they found a satchel bag containing a knife, and then he was promptly arrested. But unfortunately, he was shielded from investigation, released due to his membership to the Communist Party. And additionally, the Soviet crime labs erroneously reported that his blood type did not match what was found at the murders. And all of this changed under the political reforms of the Glasnost and the Perestroika, and the search for the killer began to make progress. And with the passage of time and easing of political restrictions, Burkov and Festiev devise a plan to blanket almost all the railroad stations where the serial killer preys upon the young and unsuspecting, with the conspicuous uninformed men to discourage the killer. 3 stations, however, are left unattended, except for undercover agents. Chikatilo is eventually discovered and identified through the diligence of a local plainclothes soldier. Arrested, Andrei Chikatilo is interrogated for 7 consecutive days by Gorbunov, a Soviet hardliner who insists that he be the one to extract a confession. This guy is just terrible. But I mean, the performance wasn't really that bad. It was just the character himself is an asshole, played by John Wood. Joss Ackland is also in this as a character named Bondarchuk. And so this guy, he needs to be the one to extract the confession, but doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. And Chikatilo will not yield under pressure from Festiev. Psychiatrist Bukanovsky, played by Maxim Sydow, is introduced, reciting from his lengthy analysis and speculation made 3 years earlier of the sexually frustrated killer's personality and tendencies. Bukanovsky gets a weeping Chikatilo to admit his guilt and answer specific questions about the details of some murders. And this is where this particular sequence is one of the most gripping sequences in the film, because you have 2 great actors, Max von Sydow and Jeffery DeMunn, who's a very underrated actor, and here he delivers one of the best performances of his career as Andrei Chikatilo, and they both are used to their fullest. They really do bring the best out of each other here, and it's one of the few memorable sequences I remember from this film. And Chikatilo admits his guilt, answers questions about the murders, and then afterwards Chikatilo leads law enforcement officials to the crime scenes and 3 additional undetected graves. And then he ends up going to trial. He's held in a metal cage, and then he is convicted and then sentenced to death, Chikatilo. And the film concludes with Chikatilo being led to a nameless prison chamber and shows him staring in shock at a central drain in the room's floor as an uninformed Soviet soldier delivers a pistol shot to the back of the killer's head. So he's not wearing a uniform. That's really what it means by uninformed. He's not wearing his uniform, and he shoots him in the head. And that's it. That's Citizen X. It's based on a book by Robert Cullen called The Killer Department, which probably is a better book than a movie, because a book doesn't really have to deal with pacing issues or anything like that, or screenplay, to adapt it to the screen. It doesn't have to deal with that. So the book, it's probably much better, and I wouldn't mind reading it sometime. Probably be a tough read, but I want to see this done better. And I know I recently heard that there's a film based on this case called Child 44 that came out recently, which I'm kind of curious about. I might give that a look sometime, because I'm sorry, I don't think this deserves a 7.7 out of 10 on IMDb. I don't think this is one of the best TV movies I've ever seen. I really don't. But that's just me personally. I mean, a lot of it's just underwhelming. It's just a very underwhelming film. And it's disappointing to me in so many aspects. I give Silence of the Lambs a run for its money. No, it doesn't. Silence of the Lambs is a 10 times better film than Citizen X. It has better characters. It has better pace. It doesn't feel like it's twice as long as it really is. It's not boring. It doesn't have this lifeless feel to it. It has a cinematic quality to it. And just because it's a TV movie doesn't excuse it for having this flat quality to it, because I've seen TV movies that have cinematic qualities to them. This doesn't have that. It totally feels like a TV movie. And even the music by Randy Edelman it's there, but it's nothing memorable. The cinematography by Robert Fraisse, or it was like Frice, it's there, but it's nothing spectacular. The editing by William Goldenberg is competent. The directing by Chris Gerolmo is nothing spectacular either. I can see, like I said earlier, I can see why he did not direct any more movies after this. It's one of those films that I don't understand the praise, but that's just me personally. I mean, if you love this movie and you think it's a great film and it's an underrated gem and it's one of the best true crime movies ever made and it's better than Silence of the Lambs, that's cool. I have no problem with that. But this is just my personal opinion, and I just thought this movie was really underwhelming and forgettable and kind of lame in a lot of aspects. Um, but there were things about it that I did appreciate and I did like. Jeffrey DeMunn, especially as Andre Chikatilo, he stole the show. He was fantastic. He was great. And if you're a fan of Jeffrey DeMunn, I do recommend at least one view, at least watch this at least once for his performance. Um, I think they made a mistake though, trying to make you feel for him, which he's a killer. He's a sicko. He's killing kids. I don't feel for him. Let's not do this shit where to try to make you feel for the killer. And I think there's definitely a lot of stuff that you could have cut out the bureaucratic bullshit out of the film. I understand why it's there, but it still doesn't need to be there. You can cut. It doesn't need to be there as much as it is. You can cut that stuff down considerably, and the film would have much better pacing. And also, I understand it's tough, rough subject material, but you could have the actors show a little bit more life and a little bit more passion. Half the time, I thought half the time I thought they were The Walking Dead. That's how unenthusiastic their performances were in this movie. But anyway, I really don't know what to say about Citizen X, except if I was going to rate it out of 5 stars, I'm going to give it 2 out of 5. Because there are things about it I did like. I like the location shots. I like some of the screenplay by Chris Gerolmo wasn't that bad. I like that. I like the moments where you saw Stephen Rea with his family, and that's where he showed the most enthusiasm. With his moments when he's with his family. Um, and I like Stephen Rea for the most part, and Donald Sutherland, and Jeffrey DeMunn, and Max von Sydow, and Josh Ackland. So it had a good cast, and the story was interesting enough to keep me engaged for at least one viewing, but not consistently enough because there were more than a few times where I almost fell asleep. That's how much I was invested into this film, um, which wasn't very much. But yeah, I didn't. It could have been a lot better. But there's some things about the artistic choices and the directing of the kids when they're falling down in slow motion that I actually didn't mind because there's no way they could really go all out with the child murders, so they chose to show it in a way that would make it so they could still show the kids dying, but not in a way that's tasteless. So, in a lot of ways, I do appreciate the film for doing it that way, but they kind of overused it. So it was good at first, but then they just overused it too much, and then they used it for like every death, and then it became overused and lost its impact over time. But I'm still glad they did that. But yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one to review. It's a tough one to talk about because I didn't hate this movie, but I didn't really like it either. So anyway, I still would ultimately say it was a failure for me. I thought it was an interesting film, but I thought it was a failure. It did not live up to its potential, and it did not execute its storyline and its characters and its approach as well as it could have, in my personal opinion. But that's just me personally. And anyway, thank you for watching my review of Citizen X, and I will see you guys later. See ya.